women's college sports, we have all noticed a huge gap between the attendance that they receive versus the attendance that men's sports receive, and that's no different in college and athletics. Part of those reasons that I'm going to talk about today are fan attendance and media coverage. Both of these things play a big part in how many people turn up and how much attention women's sports receive. Here at the University of Washington, they do a great job with this. A lot of women's sports have much higher attendance than schools all across the country, and they're consistently ranked in the top 20 in average attendance numbers. However, we are going to look at those numbers since we are here. So Title IX, we all know that that's had a huge impact in how women have been able to live in a more equal environment within college athletics and have more opportunities here. However, Title IX cannot force people to come to games. They can't force journalists to write stories. They can't force news stations to show recaps from women's sports, and that is where the difference lies these days. In every other aspect of college athletics, female student athletes appear to be happy and content. They get the swag, they get the travel, they get everything that the men's teams get. They just don't get the attention that they deserve. So these two aspects are the ones that I'll be focusing on. Obviously, there's a lot of different things that go into this: sexism, discrimination, everything. We just do not have time to go into that today. Save that for another day. So here's some numbers between the two basketball programs at Washington. Obviously, men's basketball, it's one of those sports that brings in a lot of money for the school and for the university. So obviously that's going to get a lot more attention. But unfortunately, it still is hard for women's basketball players, I'm sure, to sit there and watch their male counterparts get all the attention. Last year, UW had Kelsey Plum, so they had a lot of great attendance and support and media coverage, and all of that media coverage over Kelsey Plum and all the things she was doing really spiked that attendance. And so this year, when they didn't have as great of a season as last year, we can see that it dropped a lot. Between the two soccer programs at UW, it's actually fairly equal. They traded over the last couple of years of who led in attendance, and I think that soccer is one of those sports where people don't really seem to care who's playing, whether it's men's or women's, and is really the real factor between these two sports is who is having the better season. So I think last year the men's had a bit more hype. This year women's had a bit more hype, and so it's nice to see that those two are consistent. And all this stems back to really just who is getting more attention, who's getting more media coverage, what teams are being marketed more. So there was an article from The Nation that was released last year that talked about why women's sports don't get as much coverage, what's the difference, why aren't people paying attention. And this quote says that women's athletics receive only about 4% of all sports media coverage. And there's a lot of sports media coverage out there. Other studies have put television time as low as 1%. And then another quote says, you'll hear women's sports advocates argue that if networks and the media in general would cover women's sports more, if you build it, they will come. If that were true, media outlets would be doing it. Nobody does more audience research and understands consumers of women's sports better than ESPN. If they thought they could make massive amounts of money from coverage of women's sports, they would be doing it. And unfortunately, that's kind of true. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, there's aspects of this that we don't really have time to get into, but unfortunately, women's sports people don't seem to care about it as much. However, I don't completely agree with this comment. I think that if you build it, they will come. I think that if women's sports was marketed more and put in better light and made more readily available, that it would get more attention. But that's personal opinion, don't have facts on that. Do have facts on diversity and how that makes a difference in athletics. So athletic departments need more women. They need them in every aspect of an athletic department because we provide different viewpoints that can help these teams, these women's teams, be celebrated and seen in different lights that maybe men don't totally understand. And I get that a lot of men try and they want to help every team, but sometimes it falls a little short. And these are average numbers. They're kind of old. They're from a study that talked about how women in different athletic departments can make a difference. And the average number of females within administration roles was 1.5 in 2014. I'm sure that's gone up by now, and because it has continued to rise over the years, which is great. However, if half or more than half of our teams in an athletic department are women's teams, I think that should be represented a little bit more. And I know in my department, in sports information, there are not a ton of women, and I think that having women SIDs really does make a difference, because we can promote these teams in different ways, and we can recognize that they need more support, and sometimes I think other people might not see them in the same light as we do. So obviously there's not much that we can actually do otherwise continue to promote women's teams, and I know that Washington does a great job, like I mentioned, and we can continue to be a good example to other universities to show that when we promote women's teams and when we give them equal promotion as men's teams, that people will come and people will continue to write stories about them and to bring out the support. Thank you.